You mentioned Roger Staubach. I mean, he's clearly the most famous Navy alumnus from the football team, Hall of Fame quarterback, all that's a multi Super Bowl winning quarterback with the
Yep.
Dallas Cowboys. Is there anyone else that got even close to that level on the professional ranks coming out of Navy?
Well, certainly when we look at offensive players, I would say the one that probably spent the most time in the professional ranks when you're talking about it like a ball carrier, somebody with the ball in his hands, was Napoleon McCallum. And he actually was drafted, and he ended up playing for about 5 or 6 years. And I think he finished up his career with the Raiders, as a matter of fact. And but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he was
Yep.
he was in Heisman in Heisman contention his senior year. And yeah, he played a few years with the Raiders, ended up breaking his leg or something like that, and that kind of ended it for him. But another one, believe it or not, is still playing, and he's he plays one position where you hardly ever hear about. It's long snapper.
Oh,
His
wow.
name's
Okay.
Joe Cardona. He plays for the Patriots, and he's been their starting long snapper for God probably 6 or 7 years, and he's won a couple of Super Bowls with them. So he's probably the most recent. Obviously, again, you're not ever going to hear. I would give $100 to anybody who can name a long snapper, even on their favorite team. So, but anyway, yeah. So those are
Usually
the
only
those are
learn
the
their
two
names if
biggies. I
they.
think Staubach and McCallum certainly in
Uh-huh.
terms of making it to the pros, and of course Joe Cardona, who's a very specialized position, but he's very very good at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say you usually only learn their name if they've been there for 5-10 years, which is the usual, or they just screw up. Then everybody knows their names
Yeah.
for the wrong reason. And I know Bill Belichick is, I believe his dad coached at Navy,
He
so
sure
he
did.
has
Yeah.
some strong ties and very very strong ties to the military and things like that. So one other thing you mentioned was that there was an offensive coordinator that brought back the triple option.
Hmm.
Personally, I didn't know it ever left. So I think for me, as a casual college sports fan, what I know about the Naval Academy and Army is that they still run a very traditional, triple option or wing T, just an old school type college football offense. Is there a reason they haven't tried to modernize, catch up with the spread offense and, the way college teams are throwing the ball 50, 60 times a game? What is it about these type of offenses that these service academies have stuck to for so long?
That's a good question, and I think that when you look at, there was a stretch there in even well, when I was there, they didn't play option ball. It was just straight up, pro set and all that kind of stuff. George Welsh was the coach back then in the early '80s, and Navy did okay. But I think the reason why you saw them go back to the triple in 2002 is because physically they can't recruit the type of players that's required to run those spread offenses and just throw it out all over the ball field. So they specifically look for you know athletes who they'll take them as big as they can get them, but they got to be quick, they got to be smart, and they have to understand how to, especially if you're a lineman, because as far as I'm concerned, in the triple option, the most important set of positions is the offensive line, and if
Yeah.
you can't understand leverage and angles and so forth, then your offense is not going to go anywhere. So I think that the reason that they use that offense is because it's not something that other teams are going to see every day, and they have to spend special time preparing for it. And I can point to countless
True.
examples
True.
of teams that were way superior on paper, and then when they played Navy, like in a bowl game or something like that, they just got destroyed. Missouri is one of them. Back in 2009, Navy just ran them right off the field, and Missouri was squawking about having to play Navy in a bowl game because they thought they deserved better, And next thing you know, they lost like 35-10, and they went home with their tails between their legs. But I think that to your point, though, there are different versions of the option, and I think the challenge for the Navy coaching staff is always to figure out what innovations can we bring to the table that will even surprise teams now. I think that you look at some of these spread offenses and so forth, and they're not, some of those spread plays, like for instance, the bubble screens and so forth, that's not that much different than a slot back pitch, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you're basically
Yeah.
doing the
Same.
same thing. You're getting somebody
Functionally
out
the
in
same
space
thing.
on the
Yeah.
perimeter, right? With blockers in front of them. So there's a lot of similarities. I think we just call it different things. But to your point, it is primarily a running offense. And I think that the goal for this incoming offensive coordinator now is to look to at least get the ball in the air, 12 to 15 times with a solid, efficiency of 10 to 12 completions, that sort of thing. The plays are designed to keep the drives going. And if they can keep on that schedule and keep defenses honest enough, that will complement the running game. And because Navy does have some good athletes, and we're really excited about the young quarterbacks that we have coming in this year. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but the reason they play with that offense is because D1 schools aren't used to seeing it,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives them the best chance of winning based on the athletes that they can recruit.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I love it. I'm a old school football guy. 3 yards in a cloud of dust. That's what I grew up watching. That's what the way the NFL and college football is now, when teams are running goal line out of shotgun and short yardage out of shot, just makes me cringe a little bit. So
Right.
I definitely appreciate that style of ball. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was, I know Navy, for the vast majority of its history, has been an independent team. They haven't been part of a conference. But recently, I want to say, was it 5, 6 years ago, they joined the was it the All American Conference or the
Yeah.
American
The
Athletic
American
Conference?
Conference. Uh-huh.
How has that changed things for for Navy? Has it been a net positive, or just kind of is what it is?
I think you gotta really take a step back and look. I think overall has been a net positive. Their first year in the league was 2015. Okay, and their first 2 years they just were just so tough to beat because we had a really good quarterback. And again, I can talk about him more in a minute. But um, the first year
Please do.
they were in the running for a conference title. They just missed out. The next year they made it to the conference championship game, and unfortunately they lost that one because the quarterback suffered a broken leg about halfway through, and that kind of took him out of any possibility of winning. But since then, it's been fairly midland. I would say they've had solid winning seasons. The last couple of years have been a little bit down, but it's not because the league is catching up with them or anything like that. It's just because the pandemic really kind of messed us up, and they're still trying to figure out uh, there's also scheduling limitations as well, because as an independent you had a little bit more freedom to schedule. And although we did schedule a lot of teams that wound up playing in the American, we still had at least one game to play with where you could go out there and schedule another D1 opponent. Okay, with the conference, you're committed to basically what, like 8 games or something like that
Yeah.
in house, right? And then we got Army and Air Force are always on the schedule, and so is Notre Dame. So that's 11 games right there. That leaves you one game to play with, and it's usually going to schedule either a D1 team or maybe a strong D2 opponent like that. Somebody like Delaware is a pretty strong team. Marshall, well, not Marshall. Marshall is D1, but
Hmm.
just yeah. And some of the other D1 teams that they scheduled that were non-conference were Marshall a couple of years ago. That did not go well, but and then like Brigham Young a couple of years before that, and similar story there. But I think that the freedom of the scheduling is probably what hurts the most. But I would say the American is as competitive a conference as there is outside of the Power Five, and I think it's a perfect conference for him. I just think that it's got those mid-tier teams that are
Hmm.
very competitive. And for anybody who follows Navy football, I always tell them, look, if your expectations are more than what the what the coaches' expectations are, then you need to find another team to follow. Because you know, and the coaches, this is what they look for. Their priority is winning season, obviously, beating Army and Air Force and winning the Commander in Chief's trophy, qualifying for a bowl game and pulling down the occasional win. So for me,
Hmm.
that translates into a 7-5 or an 8-4 year, wins over Army and Air Force, and a bowl game from time to time. That will make me happy. So